Hello again, my friends. Welcome to the lecture of History 33, History of Mexico. And I already discussed the briefly, Maya civilization. And today I want to discuss the Aztec civilization. And for that, I have prepared the um, PowerPoint lecture. Okay, let's start. I like this chronology that I have on my left side and the um, map on the right side. And I have here that the Olmec were the oldest of all civilizations, and they are considered the cradle of the all of the civilizations, actually not only in Mesoamerica, but North America. Then we have the Maya that we already discussed. The Zapotec were on the west coast. Teotihuacan were in the central region, as well as the Purepecha and Totonaca were in the west coast in what is nowadays Michoacan. The Toltec and the Aztec or Mexica were in the Valley of Mexico. And here are the Totonac people in what is nowadays the state of Veracruz. And so the Olmec established a philosophy as a cosmovision that we cannot reduce it to a simple religion, because it encompasses, it brings in a very comprehensive scientific and spiritual way the entire universe together. And they are the ones who began to attach or view spirits in some aspects in the universe, on the earth, the elements, nature, etc. And so one of the elements that the people of Mesoamerica, the Olmec, developed was Quetzalcoatl. Here is the representation of Quetzalcoatl. And it's very interesting because when you study it, you see it here in small. It's an old man representing time and space. And the space is the entire stela. The feather serpent, here is the feather serpent, and the serpent represents the tail of a comet. And so it transformed itself to all the rest of the civilizations in Mesoamerica. Another creation of the Olmec was to find the spirit in the rain. And for the Maya, it became Chacmol, and for other representations in other civilizations, it had different names such as Tlaloc. So we see how Quetzalcoatl is represented in Teotihuacan within the Toltec. Two of the, and here is two of the, or one actually, that the Aztec had on their own was Huitzilopochtli, but is the hummingbird in Coatlicue. And the Aztec had about 2,000 spirit representations of the universe, the four corners, the seasons, the earth, nature, humans, etc. So in terms of their vision of the universe, they call the Milky Way Citlalique or Ameyocan. And Ameyocan is the place of duality, where you have the male and female representation. And the regalia, the dress of Ameyocan and the duality is made of the stars, which is the creator, the universe, the creator of the stars. And every representation you see in most, if not all of their spirits is, there is always a male and a female representation. Very seldom you will have only a male or only a female, almost never. There is always that duality, male, female in the universe. And so what this is telling us is that the people of Mesoamerica did not view creation by one simple entity, a god. The people of Mesoamerica viewed creation coming, steaming out of the universe. The universe was created by an explosion, and out of that explosion was the creation of everything that is included in the universe. And so the universe is known as Ometeotl. The male representation of the universe is Ometecutli, and the female is Omecihuatl. And again, that is the duality of the spirits. And they together created the universe, or the universe created itself, and everything that we see, that we know exists in the universe. And the Aztec found representations not only in the four corners of the earth, but the four corners of the universe. And the north is represented by the snow, by white, by Mictlantecutli, which is the place where all the people who die go. The west is represented by Quetzalcoatl, which is the west. The east is represented by one of the Tezcatlipocas, and the south is the other Tezcatlipoca. And please, I want to clarify this from the very beginning. Do not worry if you cannot pronounce the names or if you cannot remember everything, because the spiritual guidance, the religion or religious philosophy of the Aztec is very complex. And you may see other representations in regards of the four corners of the universe and the earth. But according to the Aztec mythology, Coatlicue is the Mother Earth, the real Earth. And there are different representations of the earth. There are representations of those who nurture us with food. There are representations of those who swallow up all the waste of humans and animals. There are representations of the different seasons. It's not just one single female entity, but the earth is always represented as a female, right? Because it's the female in the animal kind is the one that gives life. It's very different from Christianity, in which one God gave life to a man, and out of this man's body, he gave life to a woman. In the Native American spiritual beliefs, in terms of creation, it is always the female. In whatever shape or form she is represented, she is the one that gives life, okay? So Coatlicue is Mother Earth, and she is the mother. Coatlicue is the full representation or creation of the Aztec. Coatlicue per se did not come from other civilizations. While the Olmec, the Maya, the Toltec, every single civilization had their own representation of the earth, Coatlicue, the way she is represented is very unique to the Aztec. And she's the mother of Huitzilopochtli, which is the prophet, the guide that took the Aztec out of Aztlan, a mythological place, Aztlan, and guided them to where they were to establish their city, Tenochtitlan. And he has his older sister, Coyolxauhqui, and Coyolxauhqui represents the moon, and all of her 400 sisters represent the different stars. There are different interpretations and stories about what Coyolxauhqui, and why is that Coyolxauhqui looks like this. I do not take the Christian interpretation because it's based on perhaps the foundation comes from Christianity. But one of the reasons I think Coyolxauhqui looks like this with her body all dismembered is because when we look at the moon doesn't look full the entire 28 or 31 days of the month. It looks in different ways and shapes throughout the month. And so what Coyolxauhqui is the moon, and she is the one who has bells in her cheeks, adorning her cheeks. And she is the sister of Huitzilopochtli, and she is another representation of the Milky Way, because the Milky Way, we can only see it at night, and it's all of the stars and all of the different planets in our galaxy. Um, and so as a result of their very specific predictions of time and space, especially in the universe, both civilizations developed their calendars, the Maya and the Aztec. And I truly believe that the creators of recording time and space, the original recording time and space came from the Olmec, and the Maya perfected it. And all the other civilizations continue learning from the Maya. It's not like the Aztec came and created their very own representations. Of course, by learning from the Maya, but they found their very own representations for the months and for the months and for the days, etc. So I hope you remember that Tzolk'in and that Tonalpoali, well, at least that Tzolk'in is the agricultural calendar, is the calendar that has 260 days that go according to the pregnancy of a woman. So we have 30 months of 20 days, and that is 260 days. And that is the length of a human pregnancy. And in terms of astronomy and geography, it is the precise time in which the sun passes through the zenith twice a day. And that will be twice a year, not twice a day, twice a year. And that will be in March, and that will be in September, during the two equinox, the 2 days of the equinox, especially in Mesoamerica. It is also the crop calendar, the agricultural calendar that includes about 260 days from the time you plant to the time you harvest in Mesoamerica. And so the Maya created the Ha'ab, which is the solar calendar. It has exactly 365 days, 18 months of 20 days, and 1 month of 5 days. And the Xiuhpoali is exactly like the Maya, but the Xiuhpoali is a huge stone that's circular, right? Everything in our civilizations is circular because it takes this time to go around, It's not linear like in European understanding of time and space. And it's exactly the same, 365 solar days, which is how long it takes the Earth to go around the sun. And it takes 1 day to go around in its axis. 18 months of 20 days and 1 month of 5 days. Now, those who have tried, excuse me 1 second, I am going to take off my sweater because I am getting warm. Those who have tried to understand the Maya as well as the Aztec calendar, especially those of European descent, have tried to say that these people were very fatalistic, that they had a very dark side. And last month, the month of only 5 days was the month of bad omens, of bad things happening. But in reality, it wasn't. It was just like the other months, but because they wanted to have an exact account of the 365 days, 1 month was to be of 5 days. And in some instances, it was a month of celebration. It was a month of literally partying, right? According to how the month was, it was perhaps the last days on what it will be in the Gregorian calendar in the month of March, because the first of the year for the Native Americans always falls on March 21st. So it will have been the 5 days before March 21st. The Shupoali is the 365 days divided into 20 days, 20-day months called veintenas. Remember, the ancient people, the ancestors, count in terms of 20, not in terms of 10. And veintenas are 20s with 4 to 5 day weeks. The sum of these came to a total of 360 days, which were called Shuwitl. And the remaining 5 days were added at the end, and their name was see, sometimes I cannot even pronounce it. Neomontemi. And these were the days for festivals and celebrations. And it has nothing to do with bad omens, as the Europeans have tried to say it. So now that we have figured out the time recording and calendars, let's look at how and why the Aztec decided in the year 1111 to migrate. And so they have the scientific description, and they have the mythological description. With the mythological description, their prophet, their guide, Huitzilopochtli, which is like this little figure hiding right here. And of course, this is perhaps more of a European representation than Native American, because you see that the headdress looks more than like a crown than a headdress. And so, according to the mythology, Huitzilopochtli encouraged the Aztec to leave Aztlan, right? The place of origin for the Aztec. And this is many years ago, when I began to research about the Aztec, further on the Aztec, I came to encounter that for many Chicanos, or for the Chicano movement, Aztlan is located someplace in southern United States, in the Southwest. Might be California, New Mexico, or Arizona, right? Because I think there was the attempt to try to identify themselves, or to find their ancestors in a place nearby where they came from, which is the Southwest. But according to many Mexican scholars, Aztlan could not have been any further north than perhaps 200 miles. And why is that? Because when the Aztec, and here are the representations of their migration, here are the representations of how they began to migrate. And so when they began to migrate, they were already fully aware of the existence of Teotihuacan, which is like 20 miles northeast of Mexico City. the existence of the Toltec, which is like 30 miles northeast of Mexico City. And they have come to realize that these two civilizations that preceded the Aztec were very advanced in every single aspect of society, economically, politically, socially, scientifically, in terms of the influence that they had on other societies, going all the way to the Maya. And the Aztec were already fully aware of the time recording of the Maya Teotihuacan Toltec, which is not only the 365-day solar calendar, but also that their cycles were recorded every 52 years, right? Our cycles are recorded in the Gregorian calendar every 100 years, centuries. We record 365 days and we record centuries and millennia. And so the Native Americans recorded in terms of a 52-year cycle and then 400-year cycle, etc. And so every 52 years, they were having ceremonies as they were migrating, welcoming the new cycle. And so once they arrived in Lake Texcoco, which was at that time a very big lake, it was perhaps more than 60 miles long, and in the wider areas, it was about 40 miles long. And according to their mythology, the prophet Huitzilopochtli, which is right here, the prophet Huitzilopochtli told them that they need to leave Aztlan and continue migrating until you get to a place in which you will see an eagle struggling, not eating, struggling with a serpent on top of a cactus, right? So where do they find these? According to their mythology, no place else than in the heart of Lake Texcoco. But when they arrived to Lake Texcoco, they realized that the shores of the lake are already heavily populated by different groups of people. There is not per se a very strong civilization such as the Toltec and Teotihuacan. The Toltecs used to exist as a civilization about the 1200s. So between the 1200 and the 1300s, there was not a strong civilization emerged to control the entire valley of what is nowadays Mexico. And so Huitzilopochtli told them, continue migrating until you find the eagle perched on a cactus, struggling with a serpent. And what this does is a very interesting concept of the serpent represents the female energy and the eagle represents the male energy. And it's very historical because it's analyzing the role that men and women have represented in the history of humankind and how we have been transforming ourselves. And so in order to travel without many problems, according to how they were recording their history, they divided themselves into 5 main groups, and they were known as Chichimecas. They are migrating south, of course, stopping and continuing, and they held ceremonies every 52-year cycle. So as I was telling you a moment ago, even before they left perhaps this area right here, perhaps the Aztec migrated from this area and migrated south to where they were to establish Tenochtitlan. They had an extensive knowledge of Teotihuacan, Toltec, and Maya. in every single aspect of their civilization, including religion. And here is uh, map of Mexico, and here is Lake Texcoco. In the map, it looks small, but it used to be a very big lake, and some parts of the lake had fresh water, some parts of the lake had salt water. And so they established their city of Tenochtitlan in 1321. That's when they finally arrived in Lake Texcoco and began to establish their city. Their main spirit, Huitzilopochtli, was all the representation of the sun and the war spirit. According to their story, according to their mythology, Huitzilopochtli was born in Mountain Coacalco. And Mountain Coacalco, let me show you, is very close to Tula and Teotihuacan. So Coacalco will be like someplace here, right next to Tula and Teotihuacan. And you know, one of my sisters used to live in Coacalco, and we will climb the mountain to see exactly where Huitzilopochtli was born. And so as a result of establishing Tenochtitlan, which means the navel of the moon, the main temple was built in honor of Huitzilopochtli, right? As well as Tlaloc. And Tlaloc was a very old spirit. This spirit was the creation of the Olmec, and the Olmec had already begun the representation of Tlaloc, and then the Maya continued the representation, the Zapotec, the Teotihuacan, the Toltec. All of these people had already specific representations of Tlaloc or Chacmol. And so here is the main temple of Tenochtitlan. That was the first temple that they built. But something I forgot to mention when I was discussing the Maya. These people were not about to, I like this place and here we are going to do everything. Long before any of these Mesoamerica civilizations began building their temples, they built large platforms and observed the movement of the stars for a very long time, not just 1 month, 2 months, but perhaps a few years, to make sure that the temple was to be built exactly in accordance to the movement of the stars, to the movement of the earth, to the phases of the moon. And it really shows this temple is actually one of my favorite temples. And I say that about every temple. But this temple was built actually in accordance to the different phases of the moon. And it's one of the most egalitarian temples because even though it was dedicated to two male representations, the sun and the rain. The sun is Huitzilopochtli or Cuautli, and the rain is Tlaloc or Tlayocan, right? The place of Tlaloc is very balanced in terms of duality, because in every single corner of the temple, 1 corner, 2 corners, 3 and 4 corners, there were found 4 different female spirits, such as I am spacing out, I'm sorry, such as the Cuautli. No, Cuautli. Oh my God, I'm getting old. I will remember in 1 second. And they also had 2 very strong female representations of the earth. One was Tlaltecutli, and Tlaltecutli was this huge stone that is represented as the Mother Earth, and she was positioned in the shape of giving birth. So the role of Tlaltecutli was to absorb, to eat all of the waste of humans, all of the waste of animals, process everything, including the death, process everything, and then give life to everything that we know of on Mother Earth, nature, crops, you name it. And so, and then at the very bottom, on the side of Huitzilopochtli's temple, this is Tutlaloc, and here is the Chacmol, and this is to Huitzilopochtli was the huge stone of his younger sister, Coyolxauhqui. So I suggest you take time to read this. And I am realizing this is written in Spanish, but I could translate it for you if you want to. But it's very interesting how the temple was built. And by the end of the 1300s, this is throughout the 1400s and the beginning of the 1500s, this is how Tenochtitlan looked like. Now, this was a very well organized city. The city grid, the urban development and urban planning was done with precision. What you see represented in all of the Native American civilizations, but is very clear here in Tenochtitlan, how the city is organized into the four quadrants. And that reflects the four quadrants of the universe. One quadrant, two, three, four. And you see four avenues coming and going into and outside of the city, because they built their city in the middle of the lake, right? And not just the Aztec people or the people who came to visit wrote about the splendor of the city, but even the Spanish themselves wrote about how beautiful this city was. It was magnificent. It was very clean, very well organized. You could walk through streets or avenues, or you could navigate through the canals. And according to the Spanish, you could see the bottom of the lake because the lake was kept very clean. It was the second largest city in the world after Beijing. Beijing in China was the largest city, but by 1520, Tenochtitlan had a population of 250,000 people. Their downtown, their central area where they had all of many of the temples and the civic buildings, as well as their university, you could fit about 24,000 people because they were very ceremonial. If you wanted to come to the main avenues, right, that they had built, they were very wide. According to the Spanish, 20 horses could have marched side by side in their avenues. And they were hydraulic bridges that could come up or down if big ships or big boats needed to go through it. People could enter walking through the avenues or navigating, but they had established a very strict system as to who could enter and who could leave. If anybody could come in, anybody could leave. But because they were very given to be clean, very, very clean, if you were a visitor, in every single entry of their city, they had hotel-like houses that were attended by the very same people. It was a very well organized and structured civilization. You wanted to come in the city, you could come in, but not before you took a bath, you cleaned yourself, you cleaned your clothes, and you rested. then you will be worthy to enter their city. You came to visit, you came to trade, you came to pray, you came in a pilgrimage, whatever the reason of your visit, you needed to be rested and clean, because these people were very given to cleanliness. Some records show that their emperor Moctezuma would sometimes take 2-3 baths a day. And in this way, they were very different from the Europeans who seldom will take a bath. Every single household in Aztec society had a bathroom, a bathroom in a very similar shape as we have it nowadays, with the exception that they didn't have showers, but people will take baths and they had toilets at that time. So all of the human waste and animal waste will be organized in a way that by the time the waste reached the lake again, it had already been cleaned. So the Aztec built caseways uh, made out of wooden stakes, rocks, and clay. And they were very well feeded. You see, this is a bridge that people could cross, and this bridge could come up and down. And the population continued growing, and the city needed to continue expanding. So the Aztec engineers developed techniques for adding to the original islands. And if we will discuss all of this. But they had a very good system of land distribution. It wasn't just like the governor own all of the land. In reality, this was a very equal civilization, very egalitarian civilization, because according to your family size is how much land you will get. And in addition to according to your trade, are you a farmer, are you a doctor, are you a professor, an architect, do you make clothes, are you a warrior? According to your trade is how much land you will get. And so, because they built their city right in the heart of Lake Texcoco, the waters in Lake Texcoco were sometimes salty, not good for drinking, and in some areas it was fresh water. So they engineered aqueducts to provide water to the areas in which the water was salty. And they also established a very elaborate system of canals that were used not to distribute goods, but also to navigate. And what I have here are two different aqueducts that's still standing today. This is in Avenue Chapultepec, and this aqueduct continues standing, and this was very close to downtown Mexico City. And they were so well constructed that despite the many earthquakes Mexico has faced, despite all of the building that has been happening, many of these aqueducts continued being standing. And that shows what good architects and engineers the Aztec were. So their architecture could have looked like this. And sadly, we don't have much of what it used to be. Their architecture was very simple and elegant. It was very commanding. All of the colors that they used to paint their buildings, their temples, their houses came from natural resources. The buildings were decorated with simple symbols that created a very unique style, and it also went according to the spirit that they were celebrating. And the temples were indeed a true masterpiece. So you get to see that their city was built at different levels and layers. It wasn't all flat and only a few buildings here and there. It was a very well constructed and very well organized city. And so these are some of the materials that they use for the construction of their housing, temples, caseworks, aqueducts. Of course, the volcanic stone is called tezontle is very strong and very durable. Of course, they built also from adobe, from different trees and different stones were used. Their temples, and this is a view of their downtown area. You see how clean the lake was, the canals that were to the lake, and they had aquariums, they had zoos, and throughout the entire city, they had botanical gardens, and everything was open to the public. The aquariums and the zoos and the places where they kept their birds were not just to delight the view of those of the ruling class. They were to delight the view of everybody who was visiting or who was living in Tenochtitlan. All of their temples are very correlated to each other, and they represent a different spirit, but also remember, learning from the Maya, every single temple is not just a celebration or a ceremony for that specific spirit, but also works as astronomy building, right? As an observatory, because you could observe the movement of the planets and the stars, etc., from every single one of these temples. And here are views of their temples. Of course, we have many serpent heads because Huitzilopochtli and Quetzalcoatl were two of the most important of the spirits in the Aztec mythology. And I have here different representations of their temples in different of their different cities that were under the empire of the Aztec. If we see temples like this is Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. But here is the circular temple of Quetzalcoatl, because Quetzalcoatl, by the time of the Aztec, had acquired many more characteristics that made Quetzalcoatl very important. The wind, the knowledge, wisdom, giver of food, etc. And so the governor's quarters was a palace itself. But whoever was the governor would come and live in this house. When his time was over, he would leave either because of old age, or he resigned, or he died, and the new governor will come and live. It's pretty much like the White House. The new president comes and lives in the White House for about 4 to 8 years. When he's done with his administration, he leaves and a new one comes and lives there. And so let's look at it, okay? So we have the reception area, right? Here is the reception area where every single visitor or person who came to pay tribute will be welcome in this area by the assistance of the governor. And this house, the governor's personal apartment wasn't that huge. He had a very nice big apartment, but it's not like he had at his disposal a huge castle, right? And then right here we have where the store was for the tribute. It didn't belong to the governor. It belonged to the people of Tenochtitlan, because once the tribute is collected, the very same tribute is distributed throughout the entire empire. So if they are collecting 100 sacks of corn, those 100 sacks of corn will be distributed throughout not only Tenochtitlan, but the empire. And so what we see here, this is where the governor probably welcomed the people, the reception area, and these were also part of his quarters. And then we have the garden courtyard, which will be all of this area. Here they had botanical gardens, they kept animals, they had, this was a beautiful, beautiful garden. Um, and then here is where the empire, the governor will sit here, or the people who were to receive the tribute, and he will receive people that came to report how everything was happening in the empire, where meetings were held because everything was to keep the entire empire happy. And everybody had a house, everybody had a roof, everybody had food, everybody had clothing. And here is where they kept all of the weapons. So the garden courtyard was rather big, and it was very, the quarters of the governor were very big, very ample, but it wasn't just for the governor himself. People could come and go every single day. All right, so I am going to stop here because this lecture is going to be very long, and when we come back, we will continue talking about the Aztec and how every single civilization in Mesoamerica did practice the ball game. And we will see that the ball game is not just a sport, but is very ceremonial. And you have probably, I always look at my hair, how it sticks up. You have probably heard all of the different interpretations of the ball game, which in some way are again the creation of the European understanding or lack of, and trying to look at the human sacrifice in whatever shape or form. But don't believe everything you hear that comes from Europeans or Euro Americans. If your major is anthropology, I suggest you read some of the Mexican scholars or other scholars, not just the Europeans. Okay, my friends, I will see you very soon for the second part of the Aztec civilization lecture.